Jesus saw the crowds and went up a hill, where he sat down. His disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. Happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Happy are those who mourn. God will comfort them. Happy are those who are humble. They will receive what God has promised. Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires. God will satisfy them fully. Happy are those who are merciful to others. God will be merciful to them. Happy are the pure in heart. They will see God. Happy are those who work for peace. God will call them His children. Happy are those who are persecuted because they do what God requires. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Happy are you when people insult you and persecute you and tell all kinds of evil lies against you because you are my followers. Be happy and glad, for a great reward is kept for you in heaven. This is how the prophets who lived before you were persecuted. The Gospel of the Lord.
You know, I work in a Jesuit house of formation. That's my present job. The training of young Jesuit seminarians in Andheri in Mumbai. I'm also young. We're training younger fellows. And something that we are occupied with and quite excited about these days, in this month, is a play that we are putting up. You know, this is a year of training in the humanities. So a training for the brothers for 1 year in the arts and language and culture and history and drama and media and all of that. So one of the things of the academic year is a play, an annual drama which we always stage. That's coming up very soon in Feb. And the play that we are putting up this time is called, interestingly, The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. The title of the play only is a little startling, of course. The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. Very interesting play. The plot is something like this. I'll tell you later why I'm saying this. The setting is somewhere in purgatory, between heaven and earth. Now this, remember, is fiction, okay? It's the imagination of the playwright. So never mind what your views on purgatory are, this is all imagination. So the play is set somewhere in purgatory, in a little courtroom. And that courtroom has a name. It's called Hope. And in this courtroom, various cases come up for hearing. Like, you know, cases come up in court. Different cases of people who are probably languishing in purgatory or hell and who can be pushed up to heaven. And one of the cases that comes up is that of Judas Iscariot. Somebody files a petition that, this man, whom probably we might think of as among the most condemned in Christian history, probably deserves another chance and can be sent up to heaven. He's forgiven. He can probably be a person who is reconciled. So his case comes up for hearing, and all kinds of witnesses are called in by the prosecutor and the defense counsel to cross-check what do they think about sending Judas's case forward. So the witnesses also are very interesting. You have Pilate and Caiaphas, and Mary Magdalene is called in, and Satan is called in, and Jesus himself is called in. A very interesting thing. To make a long story short, among the many human traits that come out of this very powerful drama is the theme of despair. Judas finds himself in a state of great despair. You can imagine, he went and committed suicide. Great despair, anguish, that Jesus could have helped so many, he forgave so many, Why did I have to be the one to have been left out? Nobody makes a mention of me. Despair comes through very strongly. And correspondingly, the other theme of joy and hope comes through equally strongly, if not stronger. Jesus himself towards the end of the play, I'm cutting it short, Jesus himself towards the end of the play tries to regale Judas and tries to enthuse him and tries to get him to be cheerful and understand, look, I love you, we have always loved you, you have always been close to me, we make mistakes, life is like that, all of that. He tries to cheer him up and fill him with a sense of joy, but the play ends with a kind of a loose ending. Judas is kind of all mixed up with his feelings. Now, why did I tell you this? I think this play tells us something about despair, but more importantly, it tells us something about Christian joy and hope. That's our theme for today. Rejoice and be glad. Joy, for me, is not something superficial. It has its foundations in other foundational attributes or attitudes, if you like. And one of the important things joy is founded on is a relationship of intimacy and closeness. In this case, we are talking about a relationship of closeness with Jesus himself, which in Judas's case was so utterly strained that he could not repair it. And this relationship with God, which is meant to be very intimate, is founded upon the attitude of hope. Now, hope can be understood in different ways. I want to present to you one understanding of a particular scripture scholar who reminds us, a very strong interpretation. He tells us, there's a difference between optimism and hope. Big difference between being optimistic and being hopeful. And he explains it this way. He says, optimism is like a positive energy, a positive feeling, a confidence that things will work out well, that things in the end will be good and they'll be okay. For instance, we were optimistic that it'll get a little warmer during the day. We could be optimistic that I will, clear an exam which is very tough. I'm optimistic that I will get through a tough job interview. I'm optimistic that I will find a good partner in marriage. That's optimism. Hope, he says, is a different thing. Hope is a state of being, he says. Hope is a kind of a condition of the heart where we trust deep down within us that life makes sense, that the things of this world, the things that go on in my life make sense even when everything does not pan out the way I would want it to. So hope, he says, is a state of being. It's a primary disposition in which I feel a certain assurance that God is present. The things of this world make sense. There is a purpose to my life. There is a purpose to why things have happened in my life. Life is meaningful even when everything does not pan out the way I would want it to. Even when I don't find all the answers to the questions I have in life. Even when there are things that go on in my life or in my family and I wonder why God is doing this to me. Despite all of this, there's an assuredness, there is a calmness, there is a peaceful acceptance that my life makes sense. There is a God, and God is guiding me towards a deeper and more intimate union with Him all the time. That, he says, is hope. And hope has its own sister attitudes, if you like. The very attitudes I mentioned of calmness and an assuredness, acceptance. This is not resignation or passivity, but a calm and peaceful acceptance of the goings on in my life, trusting that all of this has been directed by the Lord. And in these attitudes, or along with these attitudes, I like to connect the very basic attribute of joy. Joy is something very deep. It's not superficial, it's not on the top, it's not like boy. It's not about smiling all the time. Joy does not mean we are going around cracking jokes and all. Joy is something very deep. We exude a certain joy in our life when we trust that God is in charge of our life and He's taking us towards a deeper union with Him. This was precisely what Judas Iscariot found it difficult to arrive at in his moment of greatest despair. In Pope Francis's latest apostolic exhortation, Gaudete et Exsultate, he deals with the whole theme of holiness. That's the central idea in the apostolic letter. Holiness. And to be holy, he says, among many other things, to be holy, most importantly, is to be joyful. To be holy is to be a person who can rejoice in the abundant blessings that God gives us every day. To exude a certain happiness which is deep within us. And this is holiness. Holiness is many other things, but this for Pope Francis is holiness. I'm reminded of different ways of understanding this idea of holiness. There are many ways we can understand holiness, but I want to share with you just two classical ways, and I'm going to stop with this. Two classical ways of understanding the concept of holiness. You know, there is the Greek way, the Greek classical way of understanding holiness, and the Hebrew way of understanding holiness. I'd like to share this. Some of you may have heard this. For the Greeks, holiness was perfection. To be holy was to be perfectly righteous, to keep sin totally out. No sin, no error in life, no incongruity, nothing wrong, nothing that is out of the way, nothing that does not take us to God. Holiness is keeping to the commandments, keeping to this, keeping that. That was the Greek understanding of holiness. But the Hebrew understanding of holiness is different. According to the Hebrews, holiness simply meant walking faithfully with God. If you did this, you are holy. Walking faithfully, humbly and trustfully with God. That's the core classical Hebrew understanding of holiness. One that I like very much. And if we choose to live by this understanding of holiness, it will mean that our life will be full of its ups and downs. There will be the good part, there will be the troublesome parts, there will be our vulnerabilities and our limitations and our dark side and our joys and our aspirations and the things that make us ashamed, our loneliness, our insecurities, all of that. But if we take this all along with us and walk trustfully and humbly and faithfully with God, that's keeping to holiness. And in his apostolic exhortation, the Pope is in a way alluding to this fact. If we walk joyfully and trustfully and faithfully with God, that's holiness. So being joyful does not mean that we will have no struggles. Being joyful does not mean all is well all the time. Being joyful does not mean, okay, I have no problems, no tensions, no insecurities, nothing that worries me. All of this is part of the package. All of this is part of that deeper conviction and that assuredness within us that God is constantly directing us with all that there is to us, if only we walk trustfully and faithfully along with God. Let's take a moment now to ponder our own lives. Where do I find myself in terms of my relationship with God? We remember that all of these attributes have their foundation primarily in a relationship. Where do I find myself in my equation with God? Am I intimate or am I distant? Do I find myself a person of hope? A person who has a certain assuredness within me that life makes sense, things of my life have a direction, even though everything may not be turning out the way I may want it to turn out. And finally, does this remind me of the fact that I am called to be a person of joy, deep, radiating joy, not something that is superficial. Laughter and cheerfulness is all very good, but a person of deep, radiating joy, a person who trustfully and faithfully walks with the Lord towards a life of holiness. Let's pause for a few moments. Ponder any inspiration that the Lord may have for you on this feast day here at the shrine of the infant Jesus in Nasik. Let's spend a moment in silence.